The Oracl3 Network.
We have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 16910 means we got shots fired. 4:15 ASL. Route 91 sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
Begin with that developing situation in Napa County right now.
There is an active shooter and hostage situation unfolding at the Veterans Home in Yountville. This is located in Napa County. CHP and SWAT teams have responded to the facility located on California Drive off Highway 29.
And according to Napa CHP, there is an active shooter on that grounds. At least 2 hostages. We have confirmed that. Several dozen law enforcement officers from multiple agencies converged on the area shortly after the call came in around 10:20 this morning. We are working to confirm reports that the shooter has on body armor and fired between 15 and 30 shots and fired them at deputies. We're trying to confirm that. Several nearby businesses were put on lockdown and people were told to avoid that area.
The shooting that took place at the Pathway Home on March 9th, 2018 was a terrifying hostage situation, one in which no one was spared. Not one hostage walked away with their life intact. Instead, 3 adults and 1 unborn child were murdered in cold blood. Having no real ties to the shooter, the 3 murdered women and unborn child were innocent victims who showed up for their jobs, as they always did, wanting to help traumatized service members and troops cope with the horrific realities that war can inflict upon a soldier. Except, March 19th was different from all other days because those same 3 women and unborn child would never see the light of another day.
Active Shooter the podcast is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the No Notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge and not naming the shooter by their actual name.
We will refer to today's shooter as Greg. The Pathway Home was a non-profit residential treatment facility which assisted post-9/11 veterans that struggled with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries with the intention of reintroducing them into society. The home was a part of the Veterans Home of California, located in the wine country region of Napa County. Greg had been a patient at the home for the past year, though he was recently dismissed from receiving treatment a few weeks earlier, and he was angry. He became extremely irate after he was booted from the treatment program, and his exasperation continued to grow with each passing day. Greg wasn't going to let it go, and he planned to make things right. He was beyond angry about his dismissal, and almost immediately began formulating plans. On February 27, 2018, he rented a car from the Sacramento International Airport, a rental he had no intentions of ever returning. The evening before the shooting, on March 8th, Greg was looking for information about suicide and murder-suicide, performing online searches that included, quote, planned murder-suicide, and he read articles including, quote, murder-suicide when killing yourself is not enough, and practice makes deadly perfection. He also watched videos on YouTube about suicide and murder, all of which carried graphic warnings. March 9th was the day he planned to exact his revenge, however misguided it was. At approximately 10:18 a.m., Greg approached the Pathway home, located at 100 California Drive in Yountville, California. Before leaving his apartment, Greg wrote a note of apology to his landlord, indicating that he wouldn't be returning. Ever. He collected his weapons, an unmodified 12-gauge Stoeger coach shotgun, and a .308 JR Enterprises LRP-07 semi-automatic assault rifle. The .308 had a 20-round high-capacity magazine and was modified with a magazine release called a bullet button, which released the magazine with the push of a finger. The bullet button made the magazine unremovable without the use of a tool. Because of this modification, the rifle was considered to be an illegal assault weapon. Greg carried 3 additional 20-round magazines for the rifle, which he carried in a tactical belt around his waist. The belt included 12 more shotgun shells. It appeared that Greg was ready for a serious battle, or a shootout. Either way, he intended for people to die. Greg arrived in his rented 2018 gray Toyota Avalon and parked on the northwest side of Madison Hall, which was in Section G of the campus. The building bore security cameras at the front door and the hallways. There was a sign-in desk manned by 2 California Veterans Home public safety officers. However, they were each unarmed and were trained to a much lower standard than most law enforcement officers, meaning they weren't trained or equipped to properly handle an active shooter situation. Along with his 2 weapons, Greg carried multiple spare magazines of ammo strapped to his waist. He carried the large black tactical-style rifle in his left hand, though it was attached to a sling that crossed his right shoulder. Slung over the left shoulder was the shotgun, which laid across his back. Greg wore a blue shirt, black tactical pants, a black hat with red lettering, with black earmuffs over his hat, clear safety glasses with black frames, and black shoes. He entered the hall through a metal door that led to the basement, doing nothing to hide or conceal the guns he carried. Later, investigation showed that Greg had been at the hall the night before the shooting, so he could leave the door propped open, enough to easily gain entry the next day. This allowed him to enter without the need to swipe a keycard. After coming into the building, Greg headed up the stairs towards the second floor. At 10:19 a.m., surveillance captured him making a right turn to a stairwell labeled to second floor and going up the stairs. When he reached the second floor, Greg walked right into the group room, number 4124, where a going-away party was taking place for 2 employees.
We had kind of just started the party when the gunman walked in to the room that we were in.
He strode into the room, a man with a purpose, weapon drawn, and ready to fight. Greg told 3 veterans in the room to leave, now.
So first he let the veterans go, and then said staff needs to stay. So at that point there were 7 of us, 7 staff members. And then he said our names by first name and said, "You can go."
Doing as told, the 3 men hurriedly exited the room, which was only moments before a festive occasion with cake and toasts to the future. There were 4 other women in the room that Greg ordered out. Those 4 women fled from the room, and then only Greg and 3 other women remained. Greg kicked out the doorstop, effectively locking them all into the room.
I just ran out as fast as I could, and I thought that, my life was saved. I thought I was going to die.
Dr. Jennifer Gray Golick, Christine Labor, and Dr. Jennifer K. Gonzalez Shushareba, who was 7 months pregnant, were all trapped in a relatively small room with a madman. Just before the door to the room closed, surveillance footage captured Dr. Shushareba protectively cradling her pregnant belly, trying to shield her unborn child from the danger she inherently sensed was before them.
He was just very calm and just kind of looked at all of us.
The first 911 call was dispatched at 10:21 a.m., reporting an active shooter in progress.
CAL FIRE response for a shooting at the Veterans Home, Building G. Repeating, at the Veterans Home, 100 California Drive, cross of Solano Avenue and Outer Alameda. Staging is required. Battalion 1416 in 12. Medical involved possible active at the Veterans Section G, Madison Building.
The very first caller identified Greg by name, which was incredibly fortunate because it allowed police to respond to the scene armed with information. The first officer, Napa County Sheriff's Deputy Steve Lombardi, arrived 4 minutes after the initial call. The Napa County Sheriff's Department was contracted to police the Veterans Home, which is what brought Deputy Lombardi to the complex. As he entered looking for the active threat, the deputy felt keenly aware that he wasn't going to come back out alive. Being the only deputy on duty in the entire town of Yountville at the time, there was no time to waste waiting for backup. However, the one advantage that Deputy Lombardi did have was the previously mentioned information. You see, dispatch was feeding details about the shooter to him, including the shooter's military background. He cautiously approached the peaceful-looking Spanish-style building, armed and ready for a shootout with a dangerous, trained assassin. There couldn't possibly be a better man for the job, for the deputy was a 26-year veteran of the Napa County Sheriff's Department, who had previously served as a range instructor for officers for over 10 years, and had extensive expert firearms training. As he arrived, a witness, someone that Greg ordered from the room, waved the deputy down, telling him even more valuable information. The shooter was on the second floor, in the group room number 4124. No shots had been fired, at least not during the time it took her to exit the building. The woman used her keycard, and together she and Deputy Lombardi entered the building, carefully making their way up to the second floor, clearing each room along the way. The woman led the deputy upstairs towards the last known location. However, he stopped her from going any further past the first floor, knowing it was much too dangerous. Creeping towards the room, Deputy Lombardi slowly cracked open the heavy metal door leading into the group room. He peered at the shooter, who stood inside holding a rifle with a flashlight affixed to the barrel, pointing upward towards the ceiling. Hearing the unmistakable click-clack of the rifle being racked, a bullet loading into the chamber, one of the hostages inside the room screamed, a high-pitched, terrifying sound that echoed throughout the room. Deputy Lombardi feared the woman would be instantly shot to death because of this. Inside the room, the air was heavy with palpable fear, emanating from the women. At 10:30 a.m., Dr. Jen Golick called her husband, telling him she was taken hostage and that she knew or recognized the shooter. The line disconnected and Mark never heard from his wife again. Deputy Lombardi began firing from his service weapon at 10:31 a.m. He was shooting through the door, aiming in the direction where he saw Greg standing when he peeked into the room. Greg returned fire, also through the door, and the men exchanged gunfire until Deputy Lombardi was able to find cover. He positioned himself, reloaded his gun, expecting to see Greg exit the room towards him. As this was happening, his body cam was knocked off. The hallway became littered with white drywall dust and small shards of metal from the door. Sparks from the bullet going through the metal door flew towards the deputy, who was running on sheer adrenaline as he waited for Greg to come blasting out of that room after him.
He was armed with an M4-style rifle, 15 to 30 shots fired against the deputy.
What the deputy wasn't expecting was that once Greg stopped firing through the door at the deputy, he turned his rifle on his hostages, executing each one, coldly, brutally, before turning the gun on himself. Dr. Shushareba and Dr. Golick were each shot once, both of which were fatal. Christine Labor was shot several times. Multiple rounds caused numerous fatal injuries. Greg fired one 12-gauge shotgun slug into his own head, killing him instantly.
There has not been any confirmed communication with the gunman since about 10:30 this morning.
Deputy Lombardi held his cover until backup units could finally arrive. 7 additional officers showed up to relieve the deputy of his duties, including 3 Napa County Sheriff's deputies and 4 Napa Police Department officers. Not knowing what was taking place inside the room, only that the shooting had ceased, the police force collectively believed they had a hostage situation